the EasySMX D05. Thank you for sending it, EasySMX. This has no impact in my opinion. They see the video at the same time as everybody else. No money change hands. Is this a new line? Because the X line from EasySMX is quite popular. They're starting with a new letter, so to me that implies a new line, and maybe the D is to define controllers that by default comes with the dock. Definitely a thing with this one. Let's open it. Some features on the box, more features in the back. The dock in the back has the dongle space as well as a USB-C cable. It connects with these two prongs. Very simple, no RGBs or anything, but branded on the front. The controller itself, which we'll pick back up in a second. Small little dongle that I mentioned. A USB-C to USB-A cable, also not branded, not braided either. 2 meters long, give or take. And then an instruction booklet. Programming function, so we have extra buttons, we'll look into that. You can adjust your vibration on the controller, RGB adjustment as well. Swap your ABXY layout, triggers be rapid triggers, stick and trigger calibration, and last but not least, turbo. When looking at the controller, it definitely looks good. And in fact, I think this is my favorite look so far from EasySMX. Membrane face button, springy, fairly audible, but not, it's membrane, so it doesn't really bother all that much. Same goes for the D-pad, and we have a center pivot. We have analog sticks with an anti-skid ring around them that will also serve as RGB. We have tactile shoulder buttons, Hall effect triggers just like the sticks, and have a fair amount of dampening at the end. Your USB-C cable that is socketed, a little challenge in terms of cable compatibility, but otherwise it also prevents undesirable pulls from the cable, so some people like it. Personally, I'm not a big fan. Then you have the prongs for the dock and the 2 extra buttons in the back which can be remapped. Very nice, smooth texture on the front. The buttons feel a little different, although it doesn't seem glossy, it's a little glossy and it has a little bit of an angle. It's not exactly straight. So the arrows kind of go up at the cardinals. Textured grip in the back, slightly dotted. And we also have those little lines on the back paddles. Textures on the bumpers and triggers. Membrane for select and start. Same goes for turbo, FN, and then your home button as well. It's definitely a good looking controller. I will give it that. And when it's stocked, that's what it looks like. Oh, and the sticks, slightly textured on the edges. I thought there was a metal ring, but there isn't. I mean, that said, it glides very nicely. That's actually something that caught me a little by surprise. They probably have a good material on those anti-skid rings because it glides very, very, very nicely. Hall effect triggers and Hall effect sticks. And we also have 1000 Hertz polling rate, both wired and dongle. It's definitely one of the pros of this controller. And let's power it to see what it looks like. When docked, it will have the little LED here that will flicker, and when undocked, it will just stop. They look like they're rotating, but it's actually, from what I'm seeing, 2 zones, one on the left, one on the right. And when the color merges in the middle, it kind of gives you the impression that you have more zones. It's really just the 2 sides merging together. It's a very nice execution and one of the better looks that I have seen with just 2 LEDs. The RGB comes through here, but it also comes through a little bit at the bottom of the controller. And in the pitch black room, you can see it a little bit also on the back. I believe this has a great look overall. You can cycle the brightness by holding FN and left D-pad. And then you can also do the same with modes by holding FN and right D-pad. And then we're back to this mode. The controller itself in terms of ergonomics is just extremely familiar. There's nothing wrong here. There's nothing that stands out particularly. It's an Xbox-esque kind of controller, especially for the sticks and just everything overall. That's kind of what it feels, but on the cheaper side, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's all going to come down to the price point. I particularly like the feel on top. It kind of feels like one of those rigid rubbers, but when you push on it, you can tell that it's not rubber, but that's kind of what it feels like. And it also seems to be very good at not retaining fingerprints. Bring out the Nintendo Switch to show you a couple of things. Y plus home. There it is. FN key here is capture. It doesn't have gyro, it doesn't have amiibo support. We'll definitely check if it wakes up the controller. But before we do all that, let's see the button input devices. Here we have A at the bottom, so just like embedded on the button, and then B to the right, and so on and so forth. But you can swap that layout by having FN and A hold for a couple of seconds. It's gonna vibrate. Now if I go back, you'll notice that now A is where it would be on a Nintendo controller and B is where it would be. And that's gonna be important, especially with this controller, because you do not have a software, or at least if there is, EasySMX are not mentioning it. And I say that because that was the case with the M15 Bluetooth edition. It does work with the software, but EasySMX decided not to talk about it in their manual or on the box. Maybe it is the case here. I haven't checked with softwares. Maybe there is a compatibility out there, maybe a Shooting Plus V3 or Key Linker. There's a lot of different software that operate third-party controllers. If ever you find one that does work with it, please let us know in the comments. All right, back to the controller itself. Let's see if you can wake up the switch. You can wake up the switch, so that's nice. Now, another thing that you can do is turbo. So if you hold T and do X, for example, well, Y in this case, you'll notice that whenever I hold the button, it does turbo. Now, if we do it again, but this time, it just does auto turbo on its own. And you'll notice also that this little icon is letting us know that it's activated. And if we hold it one last time, turbo is gone altogether. Another thing that you can do is just hold T. So if you have multiple buttons that are turbo, you can just hold T for a couple of seconds, and that should cancel out all turbos on the controller, as it just did now. You can address the vibration by holding FN and doing your D-pad up or D-pad down. And that'll address the intensity of the rumble. One of the most positively surprising aspects so far with the D05, the rumble is actually quite decent. And look, let's not kid ourselves. We're looking at a cheap third-party controller option here. And usually cheap option third-party controllers have cheap rumble. This is pretty much on par with first parties. While it is not HD rumble per se, it is overall a very good experience that you're getting out of this controller. You also have stick and trigger calibration, although that one I'm not gonna do because I already did, but you wanna hold back, B, and home, all three together for a couple of seconds, and then it'll enter you into your calibration process. FN plus your triggers will create them into a rapid trigger. And just so we're clear, this is not a physical rapid trigger, but rather just a different mode swap. Still nice to have, you know, especially for competitive games. And then last but not least, of course, you have your back paddles. So for example, right now my back paddles are set to L3 and R3, as you can see here. What we'll do is we'll hold FN and the paddle that we want to map. And now you'll notice that the light here lets us know that it's ready for pairing. So we'll just push B, push the paddle again, and now it does B. Another thing we can do is macros. FN, and this time I'm gonna hold the other paddle, and now you'll notice the LED on the other side is blinking, and I will do Y, A with a timer, D-pad, D-pad down, push the paddle again, and now you'll see that not only does it repeat what we just did, but it also respects the time at which we did them. So this is gonna be your macro feature to have some presets when playing games. So it's very feature complete, very feature rich. Not having a pairing software may not be as necessary, though it would be nice to have to address things like your stick curve and whatnot. Talking about, let's go to my PC where I did all the stick testing, D-pad, the usual. Latency, so I got 34 milliseconds for buttons and 34 milliseconds for sticks. Of course, these numbers are after every delay possible, so monitor, cable, compatibility, etc. Circularity, if you like to see that circle, is pretty on point, and there is a little bit of snapback on the sticks. D-pad will be fairly easy to hit the adjacent arrows, so for platformers, and you'll see Celeste a little later, it worked really well. Oh, and the center pivot, you cannot hit all 4 arrows at once, but you also cannot hit the center pivot without hitting a key. When going into aim labs, my scores were from 27,000 to 29,000 over multiple runs. Fairly consistent. It does inhibit the usual Hall effect jitter. Not the worst, but one thing that helps it a great deal is the linearity minus the jitter, that is extremely consistent across the board. Now there is a little bit of dead zone at the end of the stick and also a little bit at the midpoint of the stick. If not for that, I think it could have done a little bit better, but overall, they were decent. Not necessarily what I would bring into a competitive settings, but it does work absolutely fine. When looking at fighting games, the input commands worked for the most part fairly well. That said, I was getting a couple of accidental jumps when I was not even close to hitting the up arrow, but I'd say it's an A-. Absolutely fine, all things considered. I'm comfortable saying that D-pad completely takes over any of the X-line products in terms of its reliability. I did take it into Celeste, and that's one place where that D-pad absolutely shined. There was not a single time that I missed a direction. It was overall extremely reliable, and I also tested it in Run, a game that I do like to test from time to time, and there as well, it was very responsive overall. When looking at Steam X input, there are no capture buttons, but everything else works fine. The input is not spoofed, it has its own EasySMX name. The extra paddles are not captured as unique buttons. There's no rumble, there's no haptic, but it works. When looking at switch mode, rumble doesn't work on PC. There's no gyro, so nothing there as well. Everything else worked fine. When testing on the Steam Deck, all three modes worked fine. However, Switch did rumble here. And it also worked when using dongle if ever you'd want to do that on your Steam Deck. Lastly, when looking at performance, your stick resolution was also decent. Probably one of those things that also complemented the stick overall. And lastly, when looking at pulling rate, only X input pulls at up to 1000 Hz, but you can do it both with wired and dongle. And one thing I do have to credit this controller for, it was stable across the board. Not to say that it was the fastest in every mode, but no matter the mode that it was on, it was very steady and very reliable. That's definitely a big plus for the D05 from EasySMX. All right, let's move towards the conclusion. With all our testing now done, what's the word on this product? Well, first of all, I'm happy to see EasySMX start a new line of products. While they have some misses, they also have their fair amount of hits, and I think this is off to a great start. That said, it was already competitive, it's becoming competitive beyond measure. And if I'm keeping that in the forefront of my perception with this product, it's kind of in between. Here's one thing that I find to be positive with this product is I don't expect anyone buying it to be disappointed. The quality is good. The product is satisfying. It has a great look. It has a dock to come with. It comes fully equipped. And some people don't want to hear anything about software. So not having one is not necessarily a negative. I love the RGB implementation. The buttons, again, although on the cheaper side, overall feel very well balanced. Talking about price, on their official website, you can find it for $45 US. And this is where this could have gone a very different way. I don't think it's overpriced, but I do think that there is strong competitiveness in this market, especially at this price point. I mean, you're $10 away from the Cyclone 2, which shouldn't even be used in the same sentence. More expensive than something like a PXN P5, for example, but you do have a dock here. So that's where I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing specifically outstanding with it either. It's a fair enough price point. It comes down to, okay, well, find the balance that you want that addresses the best the way that you game. If you're playing mostly platformers and you want something that is a fairly low profile, easy to dock, easy to pick up controller, you'll be satisfied with this one. There's really nothing wrong. And then you have 1000 Hz pulling rate, wired and on dongle. It's a good product. At the same time, when being completely transparent and the current landscape of options that are out there, it's also a forgettable controller. It's not a controller that I think we'll hear about in a year from now. What I'm most excited about is that D05, and maybe this time around EasySMX is starting with their entry level. To me, it implies that this is the start of a new lines of products, and I'm super excited to see what they're gonna bring to the table with their subsequent models. But one thing for sure, if I think of the X line that has its merits, has its faults, I think this is a very important beginning to what I hope will continue to grow into something even better and with a better value proposition with the upcoming models. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this one. Did you get it? Do you intend to get it? Do you know someone that did? And what's their opinion? What is yours? As always, let's make it a discussion in the comments. Thank you very much for clicking and watching the video. If you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the comment box. If you liked this video, consider hitting the like. And to not miss any future content, the subscribe button with the bell. I'm Clef. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.